All right, so here we go. So, Dumela, Hoida, good day, bonjour, and welcome to On the Continent, Africa Rising. My first attempt at some little social media online video podcasting or vlogging to highlight the issues of key concern for Africa and the United States. Well, with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo currently in Africa, he was in Senegal the last couple of days. It's generating a bit of attention from detractors and supporters alike about U.S.-Africa policy. For those keeping score, paying attention to events, you may have noticed that in December of 2018, then National Security Advisor Ambassador John Bolton issued a new African strategy focused on three key areas for the continent. And those three focus areas were, number one, first and foremost, advancing U.S. trade and commercial interest on the continent. The second issue was related to security on the continent, and the third is related to getting the best return for U.S. taxpayers on our activities on the continent, whether they're investments, aid, whatever it is. So with that happening, not much has happened with that new Africa strategy since then. Of course, Bolton was dismissed from the administration and last year, and then since then, as I predicted at the time in my article on the U.S. Army War College's website, War Room, it's unlikely we'd see much change in Africa policy, even though a policy had been issued, or a strategy had been issued. So here we are now, a little over a year later, in a few months, and we see Pompeo finally making a trip to Africa, something Chinese officials do quite frequently and get all the good press and good ink about how wonderful China is for Africa. It's frankly about time to see a senior U.S. official at this level make it. It'd be nice to see the president get there, but I'm sure he's not in a hurry. He's busy dealing with alligators nipping in his feet left and right, trying to find reasons to unseat him in advance of the 2020 election. So we'll see what happens there. But three issues to talk about briefly today for our discussion would be private sector investment, security, and travel bans. I only mention travel bans because that misleading term has cropped up yet again. I've seen it on Al Jazeera, and so it's time to dispel that myth once and for all. So when it comes to private sector investment, Pompeo was in Senegal, and while he was there, they signed 5 different commercial deals between private U.S. corporations and the Senegalese government and Senegalese entities. First and foremost among those was a construction project by California construction company Bechtel, a premier construction company around the globe, for 100 miles of highway linking Dakar with the major city in the north, St. Louis. Now, the amount of that deal was not disclosed, but that will undoubtedly be billions of dollars for that one, or not billions, excuse me, tens of millions of dollars at a minimum. In addition to that, the Philadelphia-based company ABD Group signed a deal with the Ministry of Economy, Planning, International Partnerships, and this one's focused on infrastructure projects for social things like education, housing, and healthcare. That's a $320 million agreement. On top of that, Weldy Lamont Corporation agreed to a $100 million program to upgrade the electrical grid in Senegal. It's another $100 million. And then General Electric, a $200 million deal for the health sector, focused primarily on technology, most likely diagnostic equipment, I would imagine. So just a quick look at the numbers there. That's 320, 425, 620 million dollars just from 4 of those deals, or 3 of those deals. Then the other with Bechtel, not sure how much that would be. So we're talking over $500 million from this visit. Now, while that's encouraging for U.S. Business sector to finally wake up and realize that Africa is here, it is a little bit disconcerting or disturbing that it takes the visit of the Secretary of State to announce these deals. Now, I appreciate that you want the most publicity, you want the most attention for a high-level visit like this, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the media, in particular, ought to pay more attention to U.S. private equity in Africa, which it seldom seems to do. So from here, he's going on 2 more visits on to Angola, which is interesting, undergoing a transformation in governance after decades long of rule by the MPLA, still ruled by the MPLA, but with Lorenzo in office, there's been quite a few changes, not the least of which is Isabel dos Santos' bank accounts in the country, which she can no longer access. So with him rooting out corruption and shaking the very powers that be, we shall see what happens in Angola and what comes out of Pompeo's visit. After that, he goes on to Ethiopia, which has become once again a critical partner for the United States. Under Haile Selassie, Ethiopia was a very close and important partner for the U.S. for decades. After his overthrow and murder, the Ethiopians turned to the Soviet Union, and for a long time there were frosty relations. Once again, relations between the U.S. and Ethiopia, while not always ideal, are cordial and beneficial. And with Ethiopia's rapidly growing economy and its issues with its power generation projects damming up the Nile and the impact between that and Egypt, this is something of great importance, and Ethiopia is an important player. Not to mention the African Union, of course, is headquartered there in Addis, where I used to work at when I worked for the U.S. Mission for the African Union. So those are the three locations that Pompeo is going to, already at Senegal and headed to Angola. So while in Senegal, the topic of security also came up, and we see that that Al Jazeera's Nicholas Haig talks about tension in Senegal, about the U.S. sending mixed messages about private equity and the U.S. leaving Africa. This comes back to this discussion about a troop drawdown in West Africa, or in the Sahel in particular. This has been overplayed by a lot of people. They seem to think that we have tens of thousands of U.S. combat troops in Africa. That's simply not the case. We're talking a few dozens or hundreds, depending where we're at. And a lot of those troops simply don't need to be there, and we can accomplish our goals. Now, I find myself in a minority with my peers and colleagues in uniform and those retired at times over this issue. But I've been there, I've run these programs, I've worked it, I'm familiar with the situation, and we can accomplish these goals with a smaller footprint and still support our friends and partners in the Sahel region. And then, of course, this last issue I'd like to talk about as I close this inaugural video podcast or vlog is I'd like to talk about this notion of travel bans. Over a week ago, the Department of Homeland Security issued a travel restriction notice to 4 more African countries, including Nigeria. Immediately, Representative Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, issued a public statement in which she claimed that 350 million people were banned from coming to America by this racist action and discriminatory. Well, there's a small problem with that. It's not a travel ban. Nigerians can come to America and will still come to America for business, for school, for tourism, whatever their purpose for coming, provided they go to a consulate and get a visa, as every Nigerian has done before them. Just like I have to when I go to Nigeria, I also need a visa. So once they do that, they'll be able to come here as long as they meet the standards. What it does affect is people who wish to immigrate to the United States. And unlike Representative Pelosi's statement of 350 million people, I presume that that's largely drawn from her conclusion that with 192 million people in Nigeria, it's more than that now, but that's the last we heard, 192 million people in Nigeria, that they all can't come here. Simply not true. The travel restriction bans those who wish to immigrate. So basically, those who want to abandon Nigeria and become Americans are the ones who cannot come here. While that's unfortunate for those who'd like to come to the United States, this is a problem that's been brewing for a very long time with Nigeria and several other countries not meeting the standards for passport issuance. And so this has been something that the United States government has been pushing for over a decade and asking for them to upgrade. This all, of course, came about after 9/11 and the change in passport issuing procedures and standards and biometrics, things like that. So Nigeria has been very slow and reticent to make the changes that have been asked of them. And rather than ban all Nigerians, which would be catastrophic to relations and to trade, the Department of Homeland Security simply issued a travel restriction for those who wish to immigrate. Once Abuja fixes these issues, they will be brought off the list. Now, Representative Pelosi also called it racism and discriminatory. Now, the problem I have with that statement is that she can make that outlandish claim, and because she may feel that way about the current administration, and that's fine, that's her prerogative. But she is obliged to be honest with people. And the honest truth here is that on the same day that Nigeria and 3 other African countries were placed on this travel restriction list, Chad was removed from it. Last time I checked, Chad is a majority Muslim country. 52% of the population is Muslim. It's a black African country. And it was removed from the list after it met the standards, having previously been placed on it during the, once again, mythical Muslim ban. That wasn't a Muslim ban. It was a travel ban for failure to meet passport standards. The interesting thing about the Muslim ban the press has never talked about is that if it was a Muslim ban, how do they explain the thousands of Muslims who arrive at U.S. airports each and every day prior to, after, and continued since this was discussed, even after it was upheld with some changes by the U.S. Supreme Court. And aside from that, the largest Muslim country in the world with 232 million Muslims is Indonesia. Yet, surprisingly, Indonesia was never on that list. So once again, that was not a Muslim ban. That was a travel ban. That was actually a travel ban from specific countries. This current round is travel restrictions. And so with that, we're approaching 10 minutes, and I'd like to thank you for your time, your interest. If you do find this interesting, I'll be calling this On the Continent, Africa Rising. I appreciate your comments. If you think it's cock, South Africans know what that means. If you think it's good, let me know. If you'd like me to adjust it, I'm looking at taking this in different directions. So thank you for your time, and I wish you the very best. Have a good day.